Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Policy 101. We have Kevin and Reana. They're going to walk you through current legislation. If there are any questions that you have, if you'll see at the bottom of your screen, you have a little chat box. To kind of get started, if you'll put your name, your pronouns, and the land that you are on into the chat box and introduce yourselves, we can all say hi. And any questions you have, if you'll put them into the chat box instead of talking throughout the program tonight. I'm Erin. I'll be your host, and I will be moderating the chat box this evening. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator for Slow Food USA.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Brian. So yeah, welcome. Thanks to Erin and Brian for helping us on the technical aspect. Let me just get my screen set up. I'm Reana. I use she, her, they, theirs pronouns, and I'm the regional counselor, or what we used to call governors, for Slow Food DC and Maryland. I'm a longtime slow fooder, and I am the director for public relations at the Organic Trade Association for my day job. I'm happy to be here once again with my consummate colleague in all things policy, Kevin Scribner. Both Kevin and I are experienced policy wonks, if you will, that have spent a long time with slow food, as well as working with nonprofits, community groups, government offices, and one of us, and you all can play a game and guess which, is also a seasoned Alaska fisherman. We're really excited to have you all here today to discuss the current policy landscape for food, farm, and fish, particularly because the 2023 Farm Bill is just around the corner. And the Farm Bill, if you aren't familiar, is a really important, very, very large, very expensive package that Kevin's going to dig into in the presentation. Today, we opted to zoom in on one area, a hotspot, if you will, no pun intended, which is going to be climate and conservation. So we'll kind of focus in on that area. Our goal today will be to give you a solid outline of some of the major policy issues that are currently or about to be in play that are really relevant, we feel, to our work as a slow food community. We'll introduce everyone to the Slow Food Food and Farm Policy Committee, which we are members of. We'll get your feet wet with what we call our three sisters of policy, and then we'll zoom in on those conservation and climate policy issues that we think are front and center right now. Lastly, we'll close the workshop with just a few tips for effective advocacy that we've picked up along the way, and we'll do a Q&A as a group at the end as well. If you do have questions as we're going, feel free to put them in the chat. Brian and Erin will be helping us with that. So if we can address them as we go, we will. Otherwise, we will capture them and we'll get to them at the end. And then similarly, if you just want to share anything about your policy work in the chat, feel free to do that. We'll also ask, I think, at the end about some of your where you'd like to dig into in future sessions. So before I talk about the committee, I would love to now turn it over to Kevin and have him introduce himself.
Thanks, Reana. And yeah, Kevin Scribner here, member of the committee, and I see a couple other members of our committee are in our attending as well. So I fished in Alaska for 20 years, go up there intermittently. I own Forever Wild Seafood, a value-added salmon business, and have been was one of the generators of Slow Fish North America, and that's become a really, I think, robust community action team, right, Brian? Is that what we think? A community action team. So we're catfish. We decided that we're catfish now, and some of you were on the Slow Fish meeting just prior to this, so it's good to see you again. But yeah, I work on all things seafood for the committee. So at that, hand it back to you, Reana.
Awesome. Okay, we're gonna do, we'd love to just do a really quick poll that Brian's gonna help us with, just to get an idea of who we have in the room. So Brian, do we have the poll to get a little sense of where folks are in the policy world or policy advocacy experience? Boop, 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 boop.
So sorry, we we had a little issue with our Zoom account, and we actually can't run the poll. So I think we're going to go with your original strategy of using the red and green emoji for determining the farm policy question. Okay. So sorry about that.
No worries. So just so we can get an idea of whether we should like crank it up to 11 or take a little more time on some things. If you have, some or a lot of policy and policy advocacy experience, if you go to the little reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom, click on the green check mark. And if you have a little bit or none at all, click on the red X. We just love to kind of see, and Kevin and I can like scroll through the little sidebar to see where people are at. I'm seeing a lot. Oh no, mix, very mixed. Okay. Okay, awesome. We have, I think, a very mixed crowd experience-wise. So in that case, I want to really emphasize, if you have questions, if something is confusing, we can dig into stuff more at the end if we want to circle back. But go ahead and flag that in the chat. And if Brian or Aaron see something where folks are like, we don't understand what you're talking about at all, then they can feel free to jump in and flag that for us so we can slow down or go back. All right, awesome. So let's go on to the policy committee. We can go to that slide. Great. So the Food and Farm Policy Committee works with Slow Food USA. We are made up of a group of Slow Food members. There's currently about 10 of us who have significant policy experience in different areas of the slow food work. So we have child nutrition folks, we have fisheries and seafood folks, we have organic and sustainable ag, grass-fed beef and animal production. We have a lot of different voices that are helping to guide our work. We can go to the next slide. The role of the committee is to keep slow food active and involved in policy work that aligns with our good, clean, and fair beliefs, and to make recommendations to Slow Food's Executive Director, Anna, about which policies we should engage in and how we might engage at what level. We're also a resource for chapter leaders and for chapter members, and we're actively working on ways that we can better share policy information, tips, tricks, updates with our community, which is all of you. So please reach out to us anytime you have questions or thoughts or suggestions, something's going on that you want to learn about, or a presentation you'd like to see, or a webinar, things like that. We have an email for the group that we can probably throw in the chat, and it'll also be up on the screen at the end so everyone can write it down if you want to capture that, to email the committee directly, which will go to all of us. At Slow Food, all of our work is grounded in EIJ. So that's Equity, Inclusion, and Justice, our Eij Manifesto. This was introduced formally a few years ago at Slow Food Nations in Denver. The manifesto acknowledges that our food system as we know it was built on injustice, and that many of these injustices exist still today. It proclaims our charge as Slow Food in dismantling the structure and building back a system rooted in joy and in justice. On the committee, we track and review a lot of different policy proposals and advocacy approaches, and we try to recommend courses of action that allow us to have the most impact. So when you're working in something like food, it's hard to think of any part of our life, even in policy, that doesn't connect to food. We do try to zero in just to make our work a little more reasonable. And we'll show you, if we go to the next slide, we have 4 big areas of sort of buckets. Fighting for sustainability, equity for communities of color, access to nutritious and healthy foods for children and their families, and what we call leveling the playing field, so fairness for family scale producers. This is sort of how we focus our efforts and how we bucket on the policy committee. To let you sort of see the breadth and depth of the things we're zooming in on, let's flip over to that legislation tracker, Brian, just to kind of show you, and we can just scroll the page briefly. So yeah, if you just kind of scroll it, like there's a lot. I don't know if it shows on top how many pages, but it's a lot of content. Erin has really helped us with this, so big kudos to her. So this is all the legislation we have reviewed and endorsed over the 117th Congress, and that's the Congress we're in right now. So it started last January 3 and it ends next January 3. So yeah, lots of stuff. So you can go back to the slides. And I'll give you a better idea of just some of them. So I picked a couple that I wanted to share with you to give you a little clearer example. So if we go to the next slide, one is the Kids Eat Local Act. So this was in our child nutrition bucket. This would help increase schools' access to locally grown foods by providing flexibility around the use of geographic preference. So that's saying, I want food that's local, and local means 100, 200 miles, what have you. Locally grown, locally raised, locally caught. And it shows you at the bottom who the sponsors are and the bill numbers if you want to know that kind of stuff. The Farm System Reform Act, this is our leveling the playing field, but also sustainability. This bill does a lot, and I only listed a few on the slide, not only highlighted a few here, but it really focuses on CAFOs, which are confined animal feeding operations. So those are really, really large animal farms that have a concentration of animals for food or milk, often crowded, unsafe, unsanitary conditions. And this, as it says, is a reform bill to really transform that sort of system of industrial agriculture. So of the things it would do, it would place an immediate moratorium on new and expanding large CAFOs. So no more, stop where we are. Phase out by 2040 the largest CAFOs, so rolling back, getting rid of some of those. Hold corporate integrators responsible for pollution and other harm caused by CAFOs. So these large feedlots, they're often owned by a company. It's usually not like one farmer who owns this whole operation. It's usually a lease system. Farmers get caught up in a lot of debt with it. It's sort of this whole vertical scheme. So it would hold those folks accountable. It would also provide a voluntary buyout for farmers who do want to leave. So like I mentioned with the debt, a lot of farmers might get into this type of agriculture and then find themselves really buried in debt or in a system they don't want to be a part of. And so this would allow them an exit option. And it does much, much more than that, but just to give you an idea. And then finally, the Citizenship for Essential Workers Act. This is a pretty broad one, and I think shows you the way in which we kind of weigh things that are not singularly focused on ag or food, but that we feel have a really important impact or connect in a really important way to what we're trying to do. So this bill, in a nutshell, would create a pathway to citizenship for more than 5 million undocumented workers deemed essential during the COVID-19 pandemic. These are folks who risk their lives, risk their families' lives to ensure that there's food on our table, and that we had essential services. So this includes farm workers, folks who work in meat and poultry processing, essential workers at the grocery store, but it goes beyond the food and farm sector. So it doesn't just include those people. So just give you a little taste of what we're doing. So now that you have an idea of these issues, I'm going to give it back to Kevin, and he's going to introduce to you our 3 sisters of policy.
Thank you, Reana. And there are 3 sisters, as you probably have sensed, is referenced on the 3 sisters of corns, beans, and squash, and how the combination of that creates healthy foods and healthy diets. So these are the 3 sisters. And again, as you see the link in blue up there, this is all on our food and farm policy page. But the big one, the Farm Bill, as Reana said, is up for reauthorization in 2023. And while I'm talking, you can just scan through the agricultural titles content as well as the nutritional title content. And it's a really big deal, and it's really helpful for organizations like ours to be able to get in early as we can. I'll show you a flow chart for how the Farm Bill goes through Congress in a second. But Slow Food, our committee we're paying attention when there's hearings on that generate the content, that the momentum for the Farm Bill. But Brian, let's go to the next slide just briefly. So this is from one of our great partners, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, NSAC. As you can see, the amount of funding for 4 years, it's huge, $428 billion. Pause there just for a sec, and you see how Congress right now is trying to move. They've already signed an infrastructure bill that's $1 billion plus. They're trying to get another Build Back Better bill going out that's we're close. The aspiration is to be in the trillions, but this Farm Bill happens every 5 years or so. And it doesn't, these kind of monies are flowing out through the federal coffers out into across the landscape every 5 years without any extraordinary legislation. But I think key thing here too is to look at the green part of the pie. That's the nutrition side, that's the food side. And the other things come, you know, a lot of the other components get into actually operations on farm and conservation. But the huge part of the Farm Bill is about food. And you may remember that Michael Pollan in the past has advocated it should be the Food and Farm Bill, not just the Farm Bill. But that's to give you just a sense of the magnitude of this legislation. So please go back, Brian. There you go. Thank you. So that's the Farm Bill. And so again, we're trying to pay attention to that as close as we can and trying to intervene as soon as we can to help influence the eventual content. So the child nutrition.
Kevin, did you want to show the flow chart of how the Farm Bill?
Let's do that. Let's do that. So Brian, go 2 ahead. So this is also from NSAC. And this gives you an example of how a bill gets from introduced in both the House and the Senate in respective committees, and then moves through the process to eventually get a bill onto for the president's signature. So every one of those steps, you know, there are committees within, you know, there are subcommittees in House and Senate agricultural committees. And there, you know, so content is coming in from different ways into the large committees. And then the agricultural committees in both houses then develop a legislation that goes to the floor of the both chambers. And then once those are voted into, approved by majority vote on both chambers, then it goes to a conference committee where the House and Senate work on their differences, which they're likely to be. And then out of that conference committee comes a resolved, you know, endorsed by the conferences, the conference committee from both houses goes back to the floor of both chambers, which needs to then, they have floor debate, and then there's a vote. And if it's passed, then it goes to the president. So what you have is a flow chart here that gives you a sense of points of intervention. And again, that's what slow food, we're paying very close to how and when to be able to intervene, noting that when it gets to the full chamber in the second round of there's already a momentum going on there. And to try to get amendments in at that time, they better be very strong, forceful, and supportive. And so as the legislation gets further closer to the White House, the harder it is to influence. And so that's what we're very conscious of, is how to intervene at the points where we can have influence. So now, Brian, if you go back to the sisters. Thank you. So CNR, Child Nutrition Reauthorization, is also huge. It's distinct from the Farm Bill, but this is the realm for slow food where we have the School to Gardens program. You know, we're very, very engaged as a movement organization about using the school lunch program to provide nutrition, especially for those children that it's very essential that they get that nutrition at school, because they're having problem issues at home. So we're paying very, very close attention to that. The third is the Magnuson-Stevens Sustainable Fishing Act. And so this is the world I'm mostly familiar with. It was brought into, it's first legislated in 1976, and the subsequent dates, 96 and 2006, is when the act was reauthorized. And so that gives it comes up periodically at a chance to review and renew and update the act. We are in a process right now of reauthorization. It's been really slow. It's been under congressional deliberation for 5 years now. We happen to have a friend. We feel Slowfish has a friend in Congress, Congressman Jared Huffman from Northern California. He chairs the subcommittee in the House. That's whose responsible it is to develop the House, this version of reauthorization. So we have, we enjoy a communication with Mr. Huffman and his committee. But just basically the Magnuson, or MSA as we call it, it manages the federal waters, which are the state waters are from the coast to 3 miles, 3 to 200 miles are federal waters. And every nation around the planet has control of their waters up to 200 miles from their coastline. Magnuson created 8 regional fishing councils along the coast, includes Hawaii and Alaska, Pacific, around the East Coast and the Gulf. Those are councils that are stakeholder participation, and they apply the policies that come out of the national policy that come out of MSA. And it's really keyed about science-based sustainable fishing. I have a lot of confidence in Magnuson about being able to do that. There are some problem areas out there. Sometimes we have some councils that maybe have some difficulty about identifying the appropriate science. But the other mandate for Magnuson is to recover depleted stocks. So if a fish stock has been depleted, and it can be from overfishing or habitat issues or climate, then Magnuson kicks in and it automatically goes into a recovery management plan. And since 2006, 2,047 stocks have actually been recovered to fishable levels. So that's a great, accomplishment. So climate resiliency, that's in discussion right now to how to introduce that into Magnuson, because it isn't there. It wasn't an issue in 2006. What's also important for slow food and slow fish is how what we feel the ocean is the last public commons. And so we're really paying attention to who has access to fishing. And you may hear in later expressions from slow fish about a resistance to privatizing that common. So there can be more about that. Aquaculture is a new emerging form of fish production, farming fish. It also includes shellfish. And we are paying close attention to that because as it is so new, it doesn't have the regulatory a management framework around it to make sure it's moving forward in ways that are not deleterious. Aquaculture is not in Magnuson. So again, we don't know how it'll move forward. We're paying attention to that on behalf of slow food. So Brian, if we'll then go back past the flow chart, and then, so this is my last slide for you all, and I'll hand it back to Reana. But what we have on the policy page are maps related to the Three Sisters. And what that is, maybe you can go to that page while I'm talking, Brian. And what we've done there is you'll see the Three Sisters. Hold on, go back up a little bit, you'll see where the Three Sisters are there. Okay, now go down a little bit further. Keep going to the maps. So what we have like there in the child nutrition policy map is the policy committee, we realized that what would be very helpful for slow food chapter members to be able to know, are they in a chapter in a district where there's a key congressional member, be it in the House or the Senate, that is influencing one of the Three Sisters. So you'll have on this page maps related to each one of these large policy arenas. And this is what, the policy committee will use this map to be able to say, if there's something coming up in X committee, and that member from that committee, be it the House or Senate, is in a district where there's a slow food chapter, we will reach out to you in that chapter and give you information and encourage you to engage your member. So that's a way to drill down to the chapter level. So thanks on that, Brian. And at that, I'll hand it back to you, Reana.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I just want to give just an immense round of applause from the bottom of my heart for these maps. Aaron and so many other policy committee interns and fellows and staff that have come through to support the committee are really the reason we have those maps, and I love them. They are so helpful. At the end, when we talk a little bit about advocacy tips and tricks, we'll talk about being targeting, right? Like talking to people who can pull the lever as opposed to just someone that you have the ear of but maybe doesn't have any control. And those maps are a great way to be like, hey, like what's my representative or my senator's role in this. So love those maps. Please use them. They're excellent. We do keep them updated. And one quick note about the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act, just in case folks are wondering, because that one didn't have dates on it. That is supposed to be every 5 years. So the last one was in 2010. We were supposed to have one in 2015. We didn't. We're almost a decade now waiting. So what happened in that case was the 2010 CNR expired and everything continued at that level, which is good and bad. Good that things didn't just go up in smoke, but bad that we haven't updated, increased, done all these important things since 2010. So that's still a waiting game. Everyone thought 2021 was maybe going to be the year. It was not. So we'll see what happens in CNR. Okay, let's go to the next slide and we'll start talking about some climate and conservation stuff. These are the ones that I'm going to dip into. So we wanted to focus on this because it's like one of the biggest connecting issues through food, right? Climate and conservation. Thankfully, we're finally getting some more attention on this, although many advocates have spent years focused on climate. On a wider level, we're seeing that. So we thought we'd each take you through a few key programs or policies that we think are really essential to our work. So let's start with CSP. We can go to the next slide. This is the program responsible for most of the conservation activities we have today in agriculture, the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is a program that I like to call the mother. It's the mothership of all programs. It's a whole farm program, and that means it rewards conservation systems. It's not just about one practice. It really requires a producer to look at a systems approach for how they're doing conservation and to pair things together for maximum impact. It covers more acres of working farm and ranch land on a multi-year basis than any other federal conservation program. So it's a really, really big one. I'll show you the map in 1 second. Just here on this slide, we can see some examples of what is in this program and what I mean when I say whole farm. So CSP works in these bundles, and you got to do like a bundle of things to enhance pollinators and wildlife, or a bundle of things in organic, or a bundle of things in soil health. So let's share the map just to kind of show some of that impact. Probably doesn't impress you that much in terms of like showing you the actual numbers, but this is the total percent of all agricultural land. So it's quite a lot of land. And if you look in particular states, there's a real density of enrollment, but also some disparity into how this is rolled out, right? We see like not so much in the plains, not so much in the Southwest. So we can definitely have room for conservation growth there. Go back to my slide. So through CSP, we can probably go back to the descriptive slide. Through CSP, farmers and ranchers receive technical assistance and financial assistance to actively manage and maintain existing conservation systems and to implement additional conservation activities on land and agricultural production. This is another great thing about CSP because it means that CSP can not only be used for new practices, and like as someone who used to work in fundraising and development, I can tell you that there is sometimes a little too much focus on new, like we have to like reinvent this, we need like a brand new solution. And that happens in conservation and climate work too. It's like people don't know about this humongous, if you remember Kevin's slide on the Farm Bill, it's actually a pretty big chunk. Like I would argue conservation should be a lot more of the Farm Bill, but like it's a pretty big chunk, all things considered, going to conservation and going to CSP. So it is rewarding folks that are already doing a great job, who are maintaining that or who are building, and they can keep going with those efforts, or they can have that acknowledged, and that's really important. So particular areas that CSP funds, it can be used for addressing particular natural resource concerns in a state or a region. So water quality or soil erosion can be an example. So that's a little bit of a zoomed out place-based approach. It can be used to assist individual farmers and ranchers in their efforts to improve or conserve natural resources, including, like I mentioned, soil health building, increasing biodiversity, wildlife and pollinator habitat, and sequestering carbon and reducing greenhouse gases to mitigate climate change. This program is incredibly popular, incredibly effective. Far more producers apply for it every year than are able to receive support from it. Despite this clear track record of success and popularity, CSP has been routinely targeted for cuts in the annual appropriations process and through the Farm Bill. And again, it's targeted for cuts because it has had a historically large chunk of Farm Bill money. So people see a big pot of money, but a very holistic, high integrity conservation program, and they think, maybe we can steal a few dollars from that. And over time, that's had a really big impact. So what we have now is this gold standard whole farm approach to conservation that's being undercut in favor of programs that have lower standards. In some cases, programs that have loopholes that allow funding for practices or projects that most of us would probably not consider climate smart. These are things like manure lagoons for those CAFOs I mentioned. Probably don't consider that a conservation project, although there are programs that fund that as under conservation umbrella. So when the 2023 Farm Bill debates begin, and they are supposed to very, very soon, the Agriculture Committee in the House has said they had a recent hearing with the Secretary of the US Department of Agriculture, and they said their next course of hearings and meetings was going to be starting on the Farm Bill. So that's getting ready to start. So when you are talking about sustainability or conservation or all this good work at the federal level, I hope you will remember CSP. It's sort of the old grand dame program, but it's so important. It doesn't have to be a new program when we have something that has a track record of working. We know CSP works. We just need to fund it at the right level so that it can get to all those farmers who are applying for it and not getting it. So let's go to the next slide, or I guess 2 slides now. Yeah, so the next one I want to talk to you all about is the continuous improvement and accountability in organic agriculture, or CHOW. We spend a lot of time in policy world thinking of these fun acronyms. It's like all staff team sport that we do. So this is what we would call a marker bill. It's a bill that is introduced in advance of the Farm Bill, and it's meant to signal interest in an issue and to raise awareness both with legislators and the public. It's like the appetizer to get you ready for the meal. So it will come up again, but it might not be in this exact form, but this is really to get us ready. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with like the word organic, the concept, and that we have an organic seal, an organic program. These things are overseen and regulated by the USDA. We can go to the next slide that'll show you some details on organic and the definition. Organic is really different from regenerative or natural or other descriptive terms that we're using because it's regulated. So it's grounded in something. There is a universally agreed upon meaning that is enforced. It's one of, if not the most regulated agricultural claim on the market. It's unique also because it's an industry that wants to be regulated and is constantly asking Congress to regulate it more, to do more enforcement. And that's sort of what CHOW is trying to address. So if passed, CHOW would establish a new framework for advancing the organic standards so that organic can keep up with the science of climate change and sustainability, as well as with consumer and producer expectations, what we think it should be. The strength of the organic seal is not only in this regulatory structure that we have, but it's also in that people trust it. If the label fails to evolve, if the standards don't keep pace with what we understand to be sustainable, then consumers will rightfully start to lose trust in it. So what CHOW does is require USDA to issue an organic improvement action plan to help move forward this really long backlog of stalled organic standards, of updates, of evolution. And over the past decade, the advancement and implementation of recommendations on the ways that we should modernize has really, really stalled. Go to the next slide, I'll show you how much it's stalled. Yellow water, so you can absorb this while I drink some water. So to give you a background as to how this works just quickly in a technical way, recommendations for changes, for updates, for modernization come from all kinds of folks. So they of course come from the industry, experts, academia, producers, but they also come from advocates like you. Just like anything else, there's an advocacy process, and these suggestions bubble their way up to a group called the National Organic Standards Board. And this group is quasi-governmental. It's not part of USDA. in terms of being under the White House, but then the NOSB sends the recommendation to the National Organic Program, which is part of USDA. That's one of the primary governing offices for organic. So that's how it works. They get the recommendations, they have a debate period, comment period, they go through this process, then they sort of decide, okay, yes, we're going to recommend this. They send it to NOP, and then NOP is supposed to put it forward in the organic seal. However, in the past decade, NOSB has passed over 20 recommendations to modernize the organic practice standards, and USDA has not completed rulemaking on a single one of them. These recommendations are critical to keeping organic current with what we know to be equitable and sustainable. Some of the things on this list include implementing clear and consistent livestock and animal welfare requirements, creating organic production standards for a whole bunch of things that don't have them yet. So fish, mushrooms, pet food, personal care, and also bringing biodiversity more to the forefront in the organic standards. So really important stuff. And to clarify here, Chow is not taking action on any one of those examples I just gave you. It's a system improvement. It's a system improvement to make sure that we don't have this kind of backlogs, that NOP acts on things in a timely manner. So organic can continue to improve and evolve and not have things sitting in queue for, a decade or 2 decades. Slow Food has just signed on in support of Chow, which is awesome. It's a bipartisan bill, and we'll continue to track this as the Farm Bill talks move forward and see, what happens, where it goes, and what action we might need to take. So let's go to my last conservation climate program that I want to talk about. The Climate Smart Agriculture and Forestry Partnership Program. This is a little bit different. This is an administrative action. So it's coming from the White House and therefore USDA. So the administrative branch is the White House and its federal departments. We don't have a lot of details about it. So it was actually announced last year as part of this big package of initiatives from USDA, which are all aimed at better addressing climate change. According to USDA, this program supports pilot projects that, quote, provide incentives to implement climate smart conservation practices on working lands and to quantify and monitor the carbon and greenhouse gas benefits associated with those practices. Okay, so sounds pretty good. Good, keywords there, but not a lot of details as to how this works. So there are a lot of these, like I mentioned, climate friendly claims, practices, carbon sequestration. There are all these sort of buzzwords or bubbles, but not all of them are rooted in science or regulation. So it's hard to understand, like, do these really work? Who's following up on this? How does it work? Lacking enforcement, lacking a standard. And so my personal experience working in agriculture on the Hill with conservation programs is that this can be a sort of slippery slope. Like I mentioned with CSP, it's this big program that has a reasonable amount of money, and it's rigorous. You have to have a conservation plan. You really have to have a full sort of suite of practices, and it's a good whole farm approach. Well, some people would like an easier approach where they can get money for doing lower level stuff, or even get money for things like a CAFO, manure lagoon. So one of my concerns with not having a lot of detail on this, even though it's been over a year since the announcement, is that, maybe this is a slippery slope for organic. Maybe this is an organic light program. So we don't really know yet what this is, but the hope is that it would build on the work that's been done. It would strengthen, it would add another layer and say, hey, we've really got to up our game on climate and conservation, as opposed to being like a lower step where there is money going out for like lesser standards or lesser practices. So something worth keeping an eye on as we go into Farm Bill talks, certainly, and as things move along. So I'm going to let Kevin now talk about some programs in the conservation and climate world that he wants to highlight for you.
Let's see, this bill, this is not something, well, this is what I was going to talk about before this, because I was, let's see, actually, because I was, first though, is in the fisheries world, in the ocean world, there's a bill that's been introduced in the House. It's HR 3764. It's been introduced by the chair of the Natural Resource Committee, Representative Gravalia from Arizona. And so it's interesting, you have a member from Arizona who's offering something on behalf of the ocean. But I think that's that member's Gravalia's sense of that he has a sense of responsibility of being in charge of natural resources. And he's probably got committee members that asked him to do that. What this brings up when a member introduces a bill, it's called the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act, and it was introduced of May of last year. Then what a member does is go out and get co-sponsors, and this bill has 40 co-sponsors. They're all Democrat. Surprise, surprise. But now it's a heavier lift to be able to take this bill and move it as a standalone legislation. That's always possible as standalone, not part of a farm bill or a larger, what we call an omnibus bill. And so it's a heavier lift that way. And I actually checked today, and some tracker of these bills said it actually has a 2% chance of being enacted. So why does a member do this? Well, it brings up another way you describe legislation is message bills. And so oftentimes what a member will do is will introduce a bill onto the floor or in committee that will send a message to fellow representatives, colleagues, as well as to his constituents and larger constituents. So there's different, different and different purposes for doing different, kinds of legislation. So with the Climate Stewardship Act, I think slow food, we should, be very thankful that Senator Booker is in as a senator and exhibiting leadership. We've had our committee, the policy committee, has had meetings with Zoom meetings with staff, and staff have participated in some webinars for slow food. So I think it's just very, so the senator is really taking some leadership and gathering the co-sponsors that you see here for moving this forward. And as you can see down there below, at the below of the slide, at the bottom of the slide, they're looking for different ways to move this forward, including with the Build Back Better Act. So that's what members are always looking is, how to, can we move this ahead on a standalone, but there might be a lot of headwind for that. Can we get it into an omnibus bill, like a Build Back Better Act? But be confident too that our committee is really paying attention to this one too. So on that, I think hand it back to you, Reana.
Right on. Thanks, Kevin. Let's see, what time is it? I think we're doing okay on time. So let's see. Yeah, all of our contact stuff will be at the end. So this is a portion of the presentation that Kevin and I have done a lot. We missed the Slow Food Nations days of getting to do this live, and our surf and turf tour, the land and the sea. And we wanted to just squeeze in a little bit of this. This is more focused on the advocacy and practice than the policy itself. But we found that it's really helpful to discuss some things that we've learned as best practices. We have a few listed here, and I have some more in my notes. So I'll give a few highlights, and then maybe Kevin, you can hop in as well if you see anything in the chat about advocacy tips and strategies. We can address that too. We can make it a little more fluid here. So some things that I really like to emphasize for folks is sort of like, if you're a writer, the inverted model of pyramid of journalism, right? Which means you need to get the very most important information out immediately when you are doing advocacy. And this is like in almost any scenario, like if you are having a one-on-one meeting, a phone conversation, even really an email, a virtual town hall, because your time is limited. You don't know at any minute that that senator or that state representative could get pulled into a meeting. Their mind could start to wander. Someone can interrupt you, and you don't want to have set up, like a movie, right? Set up this like beautiful story and all these details and like building up to your point, and then you never get there because they have to go somewhere else. So you really want to come in like, here's what I am here for and why it's important. establishing your expertise. Here's why I am an expert on this, or like what my authority on the issue is, right? How it affects me, how it affects my community, and here's what I want you to do. And then you can sort of unpack. So I think that's, for me, one of the really, really important tips and tricks. Being really clear about your ask is also incredibly important. I can't tell you, I mean, I've worked in government and in advocacy. The number of times there are meetings where you leave not knowing what the person wanted from you. And that's never good, right? Like, you're not just there to chat. So you want to be really clear, come with a solution. Even if your solution is like pie in the sky, you don't want to ever come to an advocacy opportunity and just list a bunch of problems. Here's all the things I don't like. Okay, but what does that leave the staffer or the representative with? You want to come with the solution. So this is the problem, but here's what I want you to do with it. Being really clear in that way, I found is so helpful. Kevin, do you want to jump in with some of your favorite pointers and things that you really like to highlight?
Yeah, just to add to, particularly the last thing you mentioned, Reana, and this is very cogent for me right now, is I have some friends that are asking me to get involved with, getting some comments to members about what's called the Aqua Act. And then that's again, an acronym that it's for legislation in the Senate that's to move forward aquaculture in a huge way. And there's a lot of concern in the slowfish community about that. The current intent behind that legislation needs to be kind of slowed down, if not corralled. Well, the people I'm working with now who are developing a letter, and haven't commented back to them, but it's really all negative. It's coming out with loaded with fears and things like that. And when I talked to them 2 weeks ago, I thought there was going to be a part of it that would come in with a solution side of it, would come in and just say, oh, one of the reasons why we're fearful of this legislation, it doesn't have the regulatory framework to be able to guide how a aquaculture would move forward. And so I'm hesitant to kind of just move forward a haranguing letter, because I think the members, the staff will just say, oh, here's a negative, here's a positive, stuff like that. They'll put it in there and kind of give it less credence. But if you actually come in with saying, there's a positive here, and actually can link it to another member's proposal for moving a framework ahead. In this case, a representative from Alaska has a real, he's already talked about a framework. All of a sudden you can add that in there, and stuff. So I think the respect for the staff that they have for you just goes up. But the last thing, you have strength and capacity as a constituent, and because staff is obligated, if the word gets out that a member is not paying attention to it to constituents, that's like the worst, blotch they can get, or they have to, figure out how to wear that. And that's also goes back to our map, and where we are, if there's a committee member that we feel it's important to get information to him or her, that's where we'll reach out to you all to say, oh, you're a constituent of this member. Can you, if you're passionate about this, we'll help inform you about it. Can you access your member? Again, you're a constituent that has a lot of capacity there.
Yeah, and I just want to address quickly something Aaron put in the chat. Credentials are what you make of them. That does not mean write down your curriculum vitae. It means I'm a constituent. I breathe this air. My kid eats lunch at this school. Like, those are your, you know what I mean? It's really like, what is your stake? Because you want to make it personal. So, it's like when you're writing in about a farm in Iowa from New York, it has a little bit less resonance, right? But when you're saying, no, I live next to this farm and the manure lagoon is like toxic and it's affecting me in this way. So that's what we mean on credentials. I think we can jump to the next slide and getting into the Q&A session. If folks have things they want to talk about. This is just, we don't have a particular action for you to take today. So I thought it would be nice just to give you these references one more time. So Again, we have a lot on our food and farm policy page. It's a very full page, I know, but take some time, scroll around on it, see if there's anything that interests you. And then just wanted to highlight another useful tool in addition to our maps, which is Gov Track. And this is a nice handy way to look up, like, I don't know who my representative is. You just type in your info, it pulls them up, really handy, helps you to get a hold of whoever you want to talk to advocate on these issues. We can go to the last slide, which I think has our
Reana, Brian, before you go to the last slide, when I mentioned earlier about getting that information of that Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act and it saying it had 2% chance of being enacted. Oh, that wasn't Gov Track. That was a NGO doing that. Sorry, but there are other vehicles out there that you can get readouts like I just mentioned. I thought I mistook it. It's not Gov Track, but again, and we can help you find those. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Kevin. So this is our contact info for the committee as well. If you have anything that's sort of like the big picture slow food stuff, it's best to email the committee. That's the easiest way. If you're like, have you heard about this bill? I'd like more resources on CNR. I want to hear more about MSA and what we're doing, that kind of thing. That's a great way because we have help from the Slow Food USA team to like help us find those and sort through versus our own sort of personal chaos inboxes. So we have a few minutes. If anyone has questions, if there are parts of the presentation that you wanted to hear more about or you were confused about, I think Aaron and Brian can help us.
So what I would suggest, Brian, if we go back to gallery mode, get out of screen share. And if anybody, actually can put a hand up, if they want to speak their question versus use the chat, I think that we could respond that way. Nobody's falling asleep yet, I see.
So while you percolate on a question, Brian flags a good one that we can address proactively, which is getting more involved with the policy committee. And Brian, you might actually be able to say more about like the various avenues of entry, but the committee is, again, really just slow food folks in good standing. So you're a member of Slow Food. And you have a policy area that you are passionate about or you work in, you have expertise in, we're always happy to welcome new folks and you would get in touch. But maybe Brian, you have more of like the technical way about how to filter that in that you could answer better.
Yeah, I mean, I think encouraging folks to email policy@slowfoodusa.org to share ideas on how to advance good, clean, and fair food for all related policy and advocacy initiatives is awesome. Also, so many chapters across the country have their own policy and advocacy co-chair. I think that Kevin and Reana talked a lot today about sort of federal level actions, but we know that there's a lot happening at our state levels, at our local levels. And that's really a space for your chapter to get involved and advance joy and justice through some work of reaching out to electeds that are a little closer to home. So that's what I'd say.
Karen?
Yeah, I see Karen. Hi, Karen.
So I'm involved with Pennsylvania Farmers Union. And so I am just curious about how policies have been brought forth and how do members, because like in PFU, it's kind of groundswell, the policy comes up from the members and then is voted on. And so how do you come about your stance on where something is and how does membership get involved with that? So it's kind of a little bit of a loaded question, but.
No, that's a good one. I'm familiar with PA Farmers Union. It's a great group of folks. So the way we do things, I will say, first of all, that we would love more bubble up from membership, from more policy liaisons, more member leaders. We would welcome more bubble up. I'll tell you how there's no rule, but how it often happens is we have 10 folks that are really, really saturated in the policy world. And so we're following our little buckets, right? We're following our buckets, and usually one of us, although the way one of us got it might have come from membership or someone else, but one of us will sort of put something on the table and we'll say, or we will be outreached by an advocacy group, could be the Pennsylvania Farmers Union. Someone will reach out to us to consider something. And then we will look at the materials, we will have a debate, and someone will, a discussion about it, and we'll have a vote. So I might, Kevin might come to the group and say, hey, we've got this marine fisheries bill. I think it's really, really important. There's a sign-on letter I would love for us to sign on as, committee in Slow Food. And we might read the materials and say, great, I support it, yes, or read the materials and say, I don't understand this, or this doesn't actually sound good to me. I need more information, or I don't think I can agree with it right now. And then we would have a little more robust debate. And then we'll filter it up to the Slow Food USA leadership team and say, this is our recommendation. We would like to see you move forward in this way. And this is what the committee had to say about it.
Yeah, and folks, our committee meets monthly, the first Wednesday of every month. And so that's the forum that we, for, just as Reana says, we just get updates on what we're always paying attention to, what are new items, issues to pay attention to. Oftentimes we bring in guests. That's when we've had, congressional staffers. But we also, I use slides from NSAC, National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition. We have many partners out there that we also, because we realize, it's the wisdom of the crowd. And so if you folks also have other organizations that you think would be helpful for us, wise for us to connect with, that's also something you could, send to us. And I'd like to, Reana, just, we have a minute, we have the chair of the committee, Ed Yao, on. Ed, you can forever hold your peace, or you can just add in a closing comment as chair of the committee.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you, guys. It's a wonderful presentation, and I'm really glad we've got 25 people tuned in and listening to us. That's very encouraging. Yes, we've been doing this for a while, and we would love to hear from more folks out there. And I encourage you all to, if you've got something on your mind about policy affecting your school gardens, your kids' school lunches, the farm down the road, that sort of thing, or your own farm for that matter, we invite you to get in touch with us, and we'll get back to you and invite you in, consider what you're talking about, and see what happens. This is a remarkable time in that all three of the three sisters are in some degree of play, and that hasn't happened for quite a while. And the MSA is very overdue, and the CNR is very overdue. So I think after the dust settles on things like Build Back Better bill, I think there's going to be a lot of action on the bills, and we'll be looking to engage you all at the right moment, as Reana and Kevin said, when it's going to make a difference for you to contact your senator or contact your representative with a slow food message about legislation. So it's going to be a big year, I think.
Yeah, we are excited and welcome more activity from chapters, and we would love to have just policy cohorts everywhere, because everyone's so excited about policy. So please follow up with us. Thank you for spending your Thursday evening with us, and we hope to chat with many of you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care.
So long.